Howdy, howdy, friends. Today we have a very interesting reaction, and it is this YouTuber, CallMeEzekiel, that a few people have asked. And he has some interesting videos. He seems like he does country style videos, and in this channel, we love those videos. If you're new, we do those type of reactions to history channels, geography channels. Maybe sometimes even politics channels. So if you would like that, definitely stay. It'd be really helpful if you could subscribe, for example. And I am also working on my own original content that I hopefully will release soon-ish. I also stream twice a week. I don't have really any day to stream, but I do it twice a week. So if you would like to see all of that, you can definitely stay. The streams particularly are really fun, and I personally love doing them. And it's just overall really helpful if you subscribe. It really helps me out if you leave a like, and especially if you check the links in the description. It really just helps me out in general. And the video we're going to talk about today is the Russian Civil War Part 1. So there's a Part 2. So tell me if you would like to see that. Again, on your comments, just to show, that you care or that you would like to see more of this content creator that 60,000 subscribers. He's not by any means a small creator, but he could definitely get a lot more support. So go subscribe to him, go check out his videos, and it seems like a good creator. But yeah, Russian Civil War Part 1, 1918 to 1919, the Ice March and the Kolchak in Siberia. Okay, so interesting. Well, without further ado, really, let's just check him out.
The Bolsheviks have conquered Russia. Everywhere from Vladivostok to St. Petersburg,
not
from
yet.
Arkhangelsk to the Caucasus, are red. This was not accomplished through war or elections, but by revolution. There were those who resisted, nationalists along the periphery, and the Germans with whom Russia was still at war.
Yeah, because let's not forget that by this point, World War I is still going on. Germany would eventually lose, so it's not like that would affect in the end, or the end result. Well, it obviously did affect it, but it would eventually, like Germany, for example, would not have claims to like the territory that they were claiming. They were claiming Ukraine and what now we know as Belarus. So they were claiming a lot of territory by the end, because the Soviets had this policy of neither accepting a deal but neither fighting. So it was a little dumb. If you remember that, I think we saw that on Oversimplified. Well, we watched many videos, I think, on the Russian Civil War. But yeah, not a great time to be Russian, to be honest. Well, when has there really been a good time to be Russian?
In the eyes of the Bolsheviks, the greatest threat were the Cossacks of the Don, who raised an army of 40,000 men to oppose them. The counter-revolution
Of course, yeah, sorry about the other pause, but, Russia, Soviet Union, whatever you want to call it, we're talking about really a multi-ethnic empire, or a multi-ethnic country. You can talk, maybe not to the extent of the Ottoman Empire, where you had a lot of Turks, a lot of Arabs, you had Jews, and also Austria-Hungary, for example, so Germans, Hungarians, Slovenians, Croats, Serbs. So yes, and the Soviet Union, Russians are the majority, so maybe not similar to those other examples, but you also have a lot of many different peoples living inside Russia and
the Bolsheviks
the Soviet
are
Union.
ready for it. Late in November of 1917, the Red Guard were dispatched to deal with the threat. By the end of January, the Cossacks were scattered. Of course they were. How could any force possibly stand against the world communist revolution? Lenin announced to the Moscow Soviet, "It can be said with certainty that in the main, the Civil War has ended." So that was it.
Funny.
The Civil War was over. The Bolsheviks were masters of Russia. But there was just one problem. The Civil War wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. So you can call me Ezekiel. This is the Russian Civil War.
Well.
Let's jump in. As
Okay,
the Cossacks of the
Ezekiel.
Don fled the Red Guard, a few thousand Tsarists, led by General Kornilov, were forced to flee south into the Kuban steppe. This would be known to history as the Ice March. For 80 days, these men fought against cold, privation, and the Red Guard to secure a home base for their counter-revolution. This campaign nearly met a disastrous end at the siege of Ekaterinodar. The day before Kornilov was going to launch the final assault, which would have probably failed, artillery hit his headquarters and killed him. The surviving generals gathered around their leader's corpse. One of them, General Alexeyev, turned to the man that would be Kornilov's successor and told him, "You have inherited a heavy burden. May God help you.
Oh,
That man's name was...
Holy crap. I mean, just imagine your first day in the job and you start by that line, may God help you. Oh my God, Jesus. What a bad way to start your job, if you ask me.
Was Anton Denikin. With a little over 3,500 men, he had to liberate all of Russia. Denikin called off the siege and marched back to the Don. The situation there had changed since they'd left, and Denikin was going to take full advantage. Meanwhile, in Siberia, the 40,000 men of the Czechoslovak Legion were riding trains east to Vladivostok. They were once POWs, captured from Austria-Hungary during the war, but many Czechs and Slovaks were nationalists, more inclined to fight against their imperial masters than for them. The Russians knew this, and so gave these men a choice. They could either spend the rest of the war rotting in a Russian POW camp, or they could join the Russian army and fight to liberate their homeland. But now that the Bolsheviks were in charge, Russia was about to
fight to liberate their homeland. Funny because, well, again, not really funny, but I think it was 1960 where the Soviet Union would eventually invade Czechoslovakia. So fighting for their homeland, more like fighting for Russia, and right now it's Russia or imperialist Russia, but it would later eventually come the Soviet Union, right? So Czechoslovakia always struggled against Germany, against the Russian Empire, and now against Austria-Hungary, and later against the Soviet Union. So yeah, not a great situation to be in, especially, just being squished between two powers.
To leave the war.
It's never great.
So the Legion traveled to Vladivostok, hoping that the Allies could ship them to France. As it turned out, the Bolsheviks didn't like having 40,000 angry foreigners travel along their empire's key artery.
Yeah.
They harassed the Legion at every opportunity. At the station of Chelyabinsk, they even arrested them. In response, the Legion seized the town and refused to give it back until their brothers were freed. When Soviet leadership heard about this incident, they panicked and ordered the Red Guard to disarm the Legion and force them into either the Bolshevik army or into work camps. This order was impossible.
Work camps.
The Red Guard was barely an armed mob, and their leaders just ordered them to capture one of the most battle-hardened fighting forces on Earth. As soon as the Czechoslovak Legion got wind of what was happening, they rose up all along the Trans-Siberian Railroad and captured it in just a couple of days. They then handed it all over to the Russian White Movement. And, as if the loss of Siberia to counter-revolutionaries wasn't bad enough, the Legion didn't leave Russia. Instead, the Allies landed over 100,000 troops in Siberia, plus more in the northern port of Arkhangelsk, and ordered the Legion to turn west. The Legion made it all the way to Kazan, capturing both the city and the gold reserves inside of it. They also pushed north to Yekaterinburg, but that advance would have far less happy consequences. You see, Yekaterinburg was where the Bolsheviks were keeping the former royal family prisoner. Up until now, the Bolsheviks were unsure about what to do with them. But with the Czechoslovak Legion approaching, a decision had to be made. At 2 a.m., the family was woken up and told that for their safety, they were being moved out of the city. The family and their servants, who volunteered to stay with them, got dressed. Nicholas then led the way while carrying Alexei, their hemophilic son, in his arms. Their captors crowded them into a basement. The family waited patiently until their lead captor made an announcement. Nicholas Alexandrovich, by order of the Regional Soviet of the Urals, you are to be shot, along with all your family. Nicholas was horrified, asking, "What?" They shot Nicholas first, then his son, and finally his wife and daughters and servants. Shards of diamonds and precious jewels flew everywhere, as the women had concealed them in the linings of their dresses. Everyone was dead except for Anastasia, the youngest Romanov daughter. She cried out in fear, only having been slightly wounded. So one of the guards approached.
I mean, Jesus. I mean, obviously, we can say a lot of things about Tsar Nicholas, but his family, it almost reminds me a little bit of King Louis in the French Revolution. Maybe not quite. You can say that one was a lot worse than the other, and you can say that both were bad people or bad, just overall leaders. But this is just a really brutal way to handle things, and in reality just gets to show you that things are starting with the left foot. Things are not starting well, and a regime that's willing to kill children, the children who didn't have anything to do really with what their father did, they were executed. So it really gets to show you that even at this very early stage, what would eventually happen to the Soviet Union, right?
Sure. and stabbed her twice with his bayonet. As the sun rose that morning, the bodies of the royal family were chopped up, burned, their bones dissolved in sulfuric acid, and the remains buried in a nearby mine shaft. The men who murdered the Romanovs were members of the Cheka, the predecessor to a whole alphabet soup of similar organizations that would terrorize the Soviet Union for decades to come. But the Cheka was not the only change that the Bolsheviks would make to Russia. Ending the war with Germany was perhaps the only unique Bolshevik political program that was popular in Russia. Accomplishing it was vital to the party's future. In the first round of negotiations, the Germans demanded Poland, Lithuania, and
Latvia. So we are getting to this part. He's mentioning this. So yeah, just imagine what would have happened if they actually accepted this, Again, it wouldn't really mean that much because Germany would be defeated and all the taken Soviet territories would be given back to them. But, it would have been, I think, easier for them, and they would have saved probably a lot of men because in between those months, lives were lost, I imagine.
Bolsheviks were outraged by this and wanted better terms. So to gain leverage, they implemented a policy of neither peace nor war. The idea was that they would refuse to sign any treaty with the Germans.
I mean, why would you think something like that was going to work? No. That's not gonna work. Why would the Germans stop? You're not fighting. You're just making things easier. I don't know.
But demobilize their own armies,
just quite
though
stupid.
They had. That would surely bring better terms, right?
No.
Naturally, with no opposition, the Germans just marched deeper into Russia. This forced the Bolsheviks back into negotiations. This time, the Germans demanded all of the previous territories, plus an independent Ukraine, Finland, Baltic, and Transcaucasus. Most of the Bolsheviks again wanted to
going as far as Azerbaijan. That's quite a lot.
Seek better terms. But Lenin figured out that they had no idea what they were doing, so stepped in to force the peace. With the Germans finally gone, demobilization could be completed, and their attention focused on the Civil War. Events in Siberia had proved that the Red Guard wasn't working. Volunteer militias led by elected officers may have been useful for winning political battles, but they were militarily impotent. What the Bolsheviks needed was a large conscripted army led by a professional officer corps. Since they held all of the major cities, conscription wasn't a problem. But where could they find experienced officers? Well, Russia just demobilized one of the largest armies on Earth. The country was full of experienced officers. Specifically, ex-Tsarist officers. So the Bolsheviks took two measures to ensure their former enemies' loyalty. First was the commissar system. Contrary to the popular meme, the commissars were actually a very productive addition to the Red Army. They were great for morale, and more often than not maintained productive relationships with the officers they oversaw. When moved between units, Soviet officers would frequently ask to have their commissars transferred with them. The other measure the Bolsheviks took was tracking each of the officers' familial relations. That way, they could be used as hostages if the officer considered defecting. Because of these reforms, the Red Army exploded in size, reaching 3 million men by October of 1919. They were armed with weapons taken from Russia's well-stocked armories, and led by veteran officers, overseen by loyal, if somewhat corrupt, commissars. When the Red Army was sent out to retake Kazan, the Czechoslovaks couldn't resist them. The only people who could save Russia now were the Russians. Meanwhile, in the south, the Soviet occupation of the Don would prove to be short-lived. The Bolsheviks alienated the Cossacks so much that they raised another army of 40,000 troops. This time, they not only successfully held the Don, but even launched an offensive into traditionally Russian territory. It was during this campaign that Stalin made a name for himself defending the key city of Tsaritsyn. It would later be renamed to Stalingrad in his honor. When Denikin reached the Don, he grew his force to 9,000 men and launched a second Kuban campaign. This one proved to be much more successful than the Ice March, which is surprising since the Reds outnumbered the Whites by at least 8-1. Or at least it would be a surprise if you didn't know that his 9,000 men were, by far, the most elite force of the entire Russian Civil War. Over a third of them were experienced officers. In fact, this army was too elite. There were times when colonels had to perform the duties of privates. In any case, having achieved
almost two elites, well, it just gets to show you that numbers in a war aren't really anything. It reminds me a little bit of the Balkan War between Argentina, who had in the region the largest army, right? But the British sending a smaller force, I think it was considerably smaller, but it was made of like elite Royal Marines, right? So they were very easily able to win with minimal casualties, right? Well, the Argentines had the larger force, but a lot more inexperienced and had like less advanced weapons.
Achieved full control of the Kuban, Denikin's forces grew to 40,000 men. And, even better, he wasn't the only white commander with a rapidly growing army. Up until now, the Siberian government centered in Omsk was made up of squabbling anti-Bolshevik socialists. They were pretty much entirely propped up by the Czechoslovaks.
Anti-Bolshevik
Change was
Soviet
needed,
socialists.
and that change would come from, of all places, the Russian Navy. Alexander Kolchak, an admiral, along with the help of sympathetic Cossacks, pretty much walked into Omsk, arrested its socialist government, and declared himself the supreme ruler of all Russia. The Siberian whites loved this change. Officers who were unwilling to fight for socialists flooded into Kolchak's army, but the Czechoslovaks hated Kolchak. In fact, they were so disgusted by his coup that they left the front and joined the rest of the Allies in only guarding the Siberian rear. But Kolchak didn't need them anymore. The Allies were sending all the weapons he'd need to raise his own army. At over 100,000 men, Kolchak's White Army was the largest force the Bolsheviks would face in the entire Civil War. On March 4th of 1918, that army attacked westward. The Reds responded by strategically retreating closer to their supply hubs. So by April, Kolchak had advanced 250 miles. That may sound impressive, but it was a terrible mistake. The Whites were only seizing thinly populated and under-industrialized territory, while doing little damage to the actual Red Army. They were also marching away from their own supply lines, which were being absolutely ravaged in the east. As it turned out, the Japanese, who provided over 70,000 of the Allied troops guarding Kolchak's rear, had an ulterior motive for being in Siberia. The Japanese were not in Siberia to fight communism, or to
Which we would eventually later know that they would have ulterior motives for the entire region, and maybe not directly in Russia, but more like Manchukuo and those kind of regions. However, it wasn't that far away when they were fighting a war against Tsarist Russia or imperialist Russia, right? So
Russia back into the
it's
World
not
War.
really that
They
surprising.
were only there to secure their own interests in the region. To that end, they armed and financed Cossack warlords, who ravaged the Siberian East. Even though the Allies were committed to fully supplying the Siberian White Army, most of that equipment never reached them. Whatever the brigands didn't steal disappeared into the pockets of corrupt officials. These were problems that Kolchak didn't know how to solve. The truth is that as an admiral, Kolchak had no experience with armies or politics. No one doubted Kolchak's commitment to the cause, but he just wasn't the right man for the job. When the Reds counterattacked, the Siberian White Army didn't stand a chance. Kolchak's forces began a long retreat from which they'd never recover. But Kolchak didn't even live to see the end of it, because, at the city of Irkutsk, he was captured by the Reds and shot. The Red Army had just proven itself far superior to the Red Guard that came before it. But that still might not be good enough, because Kolchak wasn't the greatest threat to the Bolsheviks in Russia. Because right as the Reds were turning the tide against Kolchak, Denikin made his move. But we'll be covering that in part 2. Which, when it's out, you'll be able to watch by clicking the link on the top right of your screen. Don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to...
Okay, well, everything he said definitely applied with him and with me. So definitely very entertaining video. A lot of things that I didn't knew. Definitely more on the details. It was really good, really good. Also very entertaining. And again, just the whole country ball style of videos, it's just very engaging, you know, and I personally really like it, and people seem to like it overall. So well, if you like this video and if you would like to see part 2, definitely leave it in the comments and I'll record that as soon as I can. And again, if you enjoyed it, also let me know, you know, give a like, subscribe, all that, blah 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 blah, and I'll see you soon.